The hospital room was quiet that afternoon, filled only with the steady beep of monitors and the soft rustle of nurses moving through their rounds. Margaret stood by the window, her wedding dress feeling heavy on her shoulders, and not from its weight, but from everything it represented. She was 28 years old, wearing a gown meant for her older sister Claire. The delicate lace sleeves, the pearl buttons down the back, the way the ivory fabric caught the light, all of it had been chosen by Claire, for Claire's wedding to Jonathan Blake. But Claire was gone now. A car accident, sudden and senseless, 3 weeks before what should have been the happiest day of her life, and Jonathan lay in the hospital bed before Margaret, his dark hair falling across his forehead, his strong features peaceful in a coma that had lasted 2 months. He wore a tuxedo that the nurses had carefully dressed him in that morning. A pink rose rested in his lip. Margaret had brought it from her mother's garden. "Are you ready, dear?" her mother asked softly from the doorway. Elizabeth Harper's eyes were red-rimmed, her face drawn with a grief that seemed to have aged her 10 years in mere weeks. Margaret turned from the window. "Mama, are we doing the right thing?" Her mother crossed the room and took Margaret's hands. "Your sister loved him so much, and his family. They need this, Margaret. They need to know someone is watching over him, that he won't be alone. The medical bills, that decisions that need to be made. Without a spouse, without family nearby." Margaret nodded slowly. Jonathan's parents had passed away years ago. He had no siblings, no close relatives to advocate for his care, and the Blake family fortune, considerable as it was, had certain legal stipulations about marriage and inheritance that Claire had mentioned once or twice. But that wasn't why Margaret had said yes. She had said yes because, in the months before the accident, she had come to know Jonathan through Claire's eyes, through the stories her sister told at dinner, through the photographs and the laughter, through Claire's absolute certainty that she had found her person. And she had said yes because, in a strange way, this felt like the last thing she could do for the sister she had loved her whole life. The hospital chaplain entered quietly, a kind-faced man in his 60s named Father Thomas. Behind him came 2 nurses who would serve as witnesses, and Margaret's father, Robert, his hand trembling slightly as he held a small bouquet. "We can begin whenever you're ready," Father Thomas said gently. Margaret approached the bed. She looked down at Jonathan's face, handsome, peaceful, unknowing. She had met him only twice before the accident, briefly, at family dinners where he and Claire had been so wrapped up in each other that Margaret had felt like a shadow in the corner. Now here she was, about to make vows to a stranger. The ceremony was simple. Father Thomas spoke about commitment and faith, about the mysterious ways that life brings people together. Margaret's voice was steady as she spoke her vows, though tears slipped down her cheeks. She slipped a gold band onto Jonathan's finger, her hands gentle. When it was done, the room fell silent again. "You may kiss your husband, if you'd like," Father Thomas said awkwardly. Margaret leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to Jonathan's forehead. "I promise I'll take care of you," she whispered. "For Claire, and for you." The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Margaret visited the hospital every day, usually in the afternoon when the light came through the windows at just the right angle. She would pull a chair close to Jonathan's bed and read aloud the novels, mostly, and sometimes the newspaper. "The world keeps turning," she told him one day, folding the paper. "Even when it feels like it shouldn't." She talked to him about Claire, sharing memories she thought he'd want to hear. About the time Claire taught herself to make his favorite lemon cake and burn 3 batches before getting it right. About how Claire had worn his college sweatshirt around the house until it was threadbare. The nurses grew fond of Margaret. They saw how tenderly she cared for this man she barely knew, how she brought fresh flowers each week, how she made sure his room felt like more than just a hospital space. Dr. Peterson, Jonathan's neurologist, was a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair and compassionate eyes. She found Margaret one afternoon in the hallway. "I wanted to talk to you about Jonathan's prognosis," she said carefully. Margaret's heart clenched. Is he? His brain activity is stable. But Mrs. Blake, I need you to understand that we simply don't know if or when he might wake up. It could be tomorrow, or it could be never. I need you to be prepared for that. Margaret nodded. I understand, but I'll be here either way. Dr. Peterson studied her for a long moment. Your sister chose a good man, and he's lucky to have you now. 3 months after the wedding, something shifted. Margaret was reading to Jonathan a book about sailing that she'd found in the hospital library when she noticed his hand twitch, just slightly, but definitely movement. Her breath caught. Jonathan? Nothing. She waited, heart pounding, but there was no further response. She pressed the call button for the nurse anyway. Over the next week, there were more small signs. A flutter of his eyelids, his fingers curling slightly. Dr. Peterson was cautiously optimistic. He may be starting to emerge, she said. But Margaret, if he does wake up, you need to understand. He may not remember the accident, he may not know that Clara's gone, and he certainly won't know about your marriage. Margaret felt a wave of anxiety. What do I tell him? The truth, Dr. Peterson said simply but gently. Give him time. On a Tuesday afternoon in late autumn, Margaret was sitting by the window in Jonathan's room, watching leaves drift past, when she heard a sound. A low groan. She turned quickly. Jonathan's eyes were fluttering open, confusion clouding his features as he tried to focus. Don't move too quickly, Margaret said, her voice catching with emotion. She pressed the call button and moved to his side. You're in the hospital. You're safe. His eyes found hers, and she saw the struggle as he tried to make sense of where he was, who she was. Claire? He whispered, his voice rough from disuse. Margaret's heart broke. She took his hand gently. No, she said softly. I'm Margaret, Claire's sister. There's so much I need to tell you. The truth came slowly, over days. Dr. Peterson and Margaret told him together about the accident, about the coma, about Claire. Jonathan's grief was profound and private. He would stare out the window for hours, and Margaret learned to sit with him in silence. When he finally asked about their marriage, his voice was hoarse. Why would you do that? You didn't even know me. Margaret had thought about this moment for weeks. Because Claire loved you, and because nobody should be alone in the dark. Something in his expression softened. I remember her talking about you. She said you were the kindest person she knew. Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. She was wrong. She was. Jonathan's recovery was slow. Physical therapy, speech therapy, learning to walk again. Margaret was there through all of it, though she was careful to give him space. They were married on paper, but strangers in reality. One evening, as winter began to settle in, Jonathan asked her to stay after visiting hours. I've been thinking, he said, propped up in bed, about what happens next. When I leave here. Margaret nodded. You'll go back to your life, and we can quietly dissolve the marriage, if that's what you want. Is that what you want? She met his eyes. In the months since he'd woken up, they had talked about so many things. About Claire, yes, but also about their own lives, their childhoods, their dreams. She had learned that he was thoughtful and funny in a quiet way, that he was kind to the hospital staff, that grief had made him more human, not less. I want you to be happy, she said honestly. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. Claire told me once that you'd never been in love, that you were always taking care of everyone else, your parents, your students, so that you never left room for yourself. Margaret smiled sadly. She wasn't wrong, I think, Jonathan said carefully, that maybe we could help each other, leave room for happiness. I mean, not right away, not romantically. I'm not ready for that, and I don't know if I ever will be, but maybe. Friendship, real friendship? Margaret felt something loosen in her chest. I'd like that. Spring came gently that year. Jonathan was released from the hospital in March, and Margaret helped him settle into his home, a beautiful old house that Claire had loved. They established a comfortable routine. Margaret kept her own apartment but visited often, helping him with therapy exercises, cooking meals they'd share and quiet conversation. They planted a garden together in Claire's memory of roses and lavender, snapdragons and daisies. She would have loved this, Jonathan said one afternoon. Dirt under his fingernails. She would have, Margaret agreed slowly, carefully. They built something neither of them had expected. Not romance, exactly, though there were moments when their hands would brush and both of them would feel a flutter of something more. But mainly, it was companionship, understanding. Two people who had been brought together by tragedy and were choosing, day by day, to find grace in it. A year after the hospital wedding, on a warm May afternoon, they stood together in the garden. Jonathan took Margaret's hand. "I never thanked you," he said, "for sitting with me all those months, for being there when I woke up, for staying." Margaret squeezed his hand. "You don't have to thank me. I want to." Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being something I had to do. It became something I wanted to do. Being with you, I mean. She looked up at him, seeing the truth in his eyes. "Me too," she whispered. And there, in the garden they had planted together, surrounded by flowers and possibility, they shared their first real kiss, and not as strangers bound by obligation, but as two people who had found each other in the aftermath of loss. It wasn't the fairy tale either of them had imagined. It was better, it was real, and it was theirs.